So grateful that we are all here together with you. John chapter 20, verse 11 is where we're going to start. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying, as she wept, she bent over to look inside the tomb. And she saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other on the foot. And they asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" And they have taken away my Lord, she said, and I don't know where they've put him. And at this she turned around and she saw Jesus standing there, and she did not realize that it was Jesus. And he asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you put him, and I'll go get him." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned towards him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And that is our passage of Scripture for the day. Thank you, Bradley, for making me look like I can sound better when I'm reading, because no one likes it when I read for a long period of time. Bradley got dressed up for Easter, by the way, so thank you, Bradley. His mother-in-law is going, "We're all thinking it," but when I was a kid, a show came out called Punk'd, P-U-N-K ''D, because it was cool. And you little TikTokers, kids out there, people were cool before you came around, okay? And we wore trucker hats and baseball sleeve shirts, okay? It was a thing, all right? And Punk'd was basically Candid Camera, which was a show that came on before it, but this one was hosted by Ashton Kutcher, you know what I mean? And it was specifically targeting celebrities, right? And this celebrity would walk into a restaurant or a gas station or some public place, and then all the world would just fall to pieces. Like the strangest things would happen, and the one thing after the next, until eventually the celebrity has to confront somebody. What is going on here? What are you doing? Are you out of your mind? And then they would get into this insane debate with this no-name actor who would not break character no matter what. And the conversation just keeps going and going and going. And everyone who's outside the situation is dying laughing because we know the whole general story. We've already put the pieces together because we're in on the joke. But what's so fascinating about the show Punk'd was no one ever predicted it. No one ever in the middle of the crisis was ever like, "Wait a second, I'm being punked right now." They all would be going, they're all trying to figure out how this all is a legitimate story that they're living through. And it wasn't until at some point out of the ether and out of the mist, Ashton Kutcher shows up, and then everything clicks into place. Just by viewing Ashton Kutcher, he just shows up, and they just start dying laughing because they're like, "Oh, okay, obviously, certainly this was not a real story that I was living through." And it would just, they punked Kanye West one time. He was filming a music video, right? And then the CIA just starts showing up and raiding the set, and they start throwing his cameras and film in a van, and he's over there with his pink polo shirt going, no, you can't take this. I bought this stuff. This is my stuff. You can't take it. That was before he made his homeless person clothing line, so he wore a pink polo shirt back in the day. And I remember at the time they punked Seth Green, who was Chris from Family Guy and Dr. Evil's son, and sorry, whatever that movie was. That scene where Dr. Evil tries to hug his son is one of the funniest scenes ever. Anyways, what's that show? Well, I can't even think of it. Don't worry about it. Matthew. Is it Matthew? Remember Matthew or Dr. Evil? And he's at his house, and the SWAT team just raids it, right? And from 30 guys in SWAT uniforms comes in, and they're just all surrounding him, and one guy jumps and breaks through a window, just in his living room. And after it's all done, he goes, I remember thinking the guy through the window was a little unnecessary. But in the middle of it, in crisis mode, you're not going, wait, time out, there's a script here, right? There's something going on. You're going, how do I get through this moment? And tragedy does that kind of stuff to us, especially death. But any sort of tragedy, any sort of like report that just comes out of nowhere and you kind of go, wait, what just happened? And this is what Mary's going through in this story, where she's come to the tomb. So Jesus died on a Friday. In Judaism, Saturday's the Sabbath. You don't do things on Sabbath. So they had to quickly bury him, and they cover up the tomb with a rock, and they had to wait till Sunday to come back and give him a proper burial. So they're coming back to give him a proper burial. The stone's rolled away. Jesus is not in there, and she runs back to tell the disciples, and they come out and look at it, and then they just go home. And she's stuck there. She's now standing there outside the tomb crying. And she's going, this can't be happening. What is happening right now? How did I end up in this spot? And when you and I go through tragedy, and you and I go through experiences with death or sickness or job loss or all sorts of things, you can sit here, you can find yourself going, wait. Something's not adding up here. I'm being punked, I think. This cannot just stand here. You mean we're just going to live in a world where death is allowed to just reign supreme? You mean we live in a world where any person at any time, death can just kind of show up and say, nope, you're coming with me, and we're just stuck there? We have to be okay with it? This isn't real, right? We're being punked. John Polkinghorne was a big science guy and came to faith later in his life, and I was looking for something to help me think through Easter Sunday. I was not expecting his book to be helpful to me, but he says this. He says, the atheist philosopher Max Horkheimer expressed a profound longing when he said, the murderer should not triumph over the innocent victim. An atheist interacting with death and murder goes, that's just not right. It shouldn't be that way. And I got to be honest, I can agree with him. I really see his point, but he did, right? Like there's a finality to death in life and on this earth. People just kind of take things from people, and they're like, sorry, I have it now, you don't. And you go, but that shouldn't be the case, right? And Polkinghorne says this, that humans have this, what he calls an intuition of hope. That somehow deep inside of us, we just have this intuition that makes us hope that things are going to be okay and that things will work out in the end. That there's some idea that even beyond death, that you're going to be okay. And yet, without God, that's just a bit of a vain delusion. That we're kind of stuck here going, well, why is there hope? Why do you hope for the future? Right? We live in this world where we hear the word irreversible just grates against our ears. No, we should be able to reverse things. We should be able to go back 10 minutes before we made the mistake. We should be able to do that. And the fact that we can't drives us nuts. We're stuck in that Great Gatsby interaction between Nick Carraway and Great Gatsby, where he says, you can't replay the past. And Gatsby, who is a not fully matured human being, goes, can't replay the past. Why, of course you can. And that's the whole point of the story, is he trying to go back in time 20 years and relive this whole thing and do it the right way this time, and it doesn't work. You can't repay the past. And Polkinghorne says this, all of us will die with business unfinished, hurts unhealed, and potentialities unrealized. Things we wanted to do and didn't. Plans we had made that didn't get done. Hopes that never came to fruition. My mother-in-law passed away 6 months ago, and all through our house we have pictures of her, and she'll pop up on our Alexa and all sorts of things. And there's not a time, it's still 6 months later, there's not a time where I walk by one of those pictures and I see her and I go, wow, I can't believe she's not there. I can't believe she's really not there. And when we get stuck in this moment of of tragedy and hardship. You just get stuck and you go, I can't believe it's actually a real thing. There's a hymn that I love called This Is My Father's World. And it says, this is my Father's world, why should my heart be sad? And you hear that line and you go, well, the reason is because there's a lot of things in life to be sad about. And in the face of death and tragedy and everything else, that any sort of hope that wants to go beyond the grave is vain delusion unless God is real. Unless he exists. You see, Mary shows up to the tomb, she sees Jesus, and it says, Sir? Now that's just kind of like a polite thing to say to a stranger, right? Sir, Mister, But by the end of the interaction, she's calling him Rabbi, Teacher, my Lord. The question we have to ask is, what took her from Sir to Rabbi? What made that switch in her? Because I know there's some skeptics in the room because it's Easter and you go, well, my tax to pay to my mom for loving me all year round is I show up this day and Christmas, and that's okay. I can be there for that. I'll sit through it. And so God bless you. I love you. You're wonderful people. You're probably cooler than me. Anyways, but here's what I know you're thinking. You're thinking, Garrett, you kind of had a finger on the pulse when you were talking about tragedy and hardship and being a human, all that sort of stuff, and I was really tracking with you. But then the moment you started pulling in Jesus into, oh great, let's go learn from the gullible rubes that gave us the Bible, who believed in resurrection and all those sorts of things, and you're going, that's where you lost me, Garrett. That's where you always lose me. Why do you always have to do this? You were doing just fine before you brought up God and Jesus. But here's the deal. I want to push back on that idea for a minute. Because you are right when you say the people who wrote the Bible had a different worldview than us. That is very real. That's true. They had a different worldview than us, and they didn't see the world the way we see the world. But that doesn't mean that they were all of a sudden people who just thought resurrection happened all the time. It doesn't mean they just thought God was going to become a person all the time. That doesn't mean they just thought miracles were always going to happen. They didn't understand where miracles came from. Like, just because they have a different worldview doesn't mean that they then were more gullible than us. It just means they had a different worldview than us. In fact, Mary lived in a non-resurrection world. She lived in a world that would have never, ever, ever thought that a man could be God and God could be a man. Now, the Eastern religions, God is kind of this, he's like a power. He's like a force. He's in all things and kind of is all things. And so, like, God, it wouldn't be weird to say God is a tree and God is a, whatever, and God's you and Jesus is God. So if you look at it that way, okay, fine, I can get in with that. But Jewish people didn't think that. And in the Greeks often thought that the gods showed up down on the earth and pretended to be humans in the image of humans to do really weird and gross things. And you kind of go, those are our gods. I don't like that. So maybe they would have believed that, but Jews would never have. The point from the very beginning of the Bible is that there's one God. He is personal, and we are not God. Like, that's the very first point of the Bible. If you're going to deal with God, you're going to have to deal with the fact that he's God and you're not. And no Jewish people thought that God would become a man. And none of them thought that people were just raising from the dead because one of them was a man. It was because one of them was God. They just didn't believe that. In Jesus' time, Israel lived under the rule of Rome. And they were a very freedom-loving people, right? They did not like that. They wanted to be their own nation. And so they would constantly have revolutionaries show up, and they would get a band of people together, and they'd have some success, and they'd eventually get squashed, or the leader would die, or all sorts of things would happen. And not a single time did any one of these band of revolutionaries ever come up with the idea, hey, let's tell everybody our guy rose from the dead because he was God. Because no one would have ever believed that. None of them would have. And in fact, when we read our story today, we see that not even Mary, who's in the story, was walking around thinking, oh, I hope Jesus rose from the dead today because that would be a great ending to this story. She shows up, she gets the disciples, they look inside, they leave, and now she's standing outside the tomb crying. Crying because her Lord is gone. Everything was on the up and up. A week ago, he was a celebrity. A week ago, they marched him through the city on a donkey, and people put their coats and the palm branches down so that his donkey's feet didn't get dirty. Like, this is how much they loved this man. And yet, now he's gone. How did it turn around so fast? How did everything fall to pieces so fast? She's out the tomb, weeping. And as she wept, she bent over to look in the tomb. Just that one more look, a little glimpse behind you one more time at a thing you are not ready to be over, but it's now over. You see this with athletes when you know it's their last game. Everyone else in their team is just walking to the dugout or to the locker room, and they're just heads going straight. But the one person, it's his last turn, and takes one more glimpse around the corner. Just to look one more time at the thing. I'm not ready for it to be over. And she saw two angels in white, seated, one at the head and the other at the foot. And they're breaking character. The fourth wall's coming down. Guys, she played into our hand perfectly, and now we're just going to sit here. We're not going to say anything. We're just going to sit here and let her looking at us, and it'll be great. And she's still crying. And they have to be like, all right, who's going to, you or me? Woman, why are you crying? You're looking at angels in the tomb, and the whole thing had happened. It's like, it's good, no. And she goes, because they've taken away my Lord. I don't know where they put him. I don't know. They hated him in life. They hated him in death. It was not good enough to rip him limb to limb. No, they also have to spit on his grave and mock everyone who ever loved him too and hide the body. And they had to do all this stuff. Why couldn't they just let him be? Even in death, can't even just let him be. That's why I'm crying. And they're like, Jesus, you're going to have to get out there. She's not getting the joke here. Sit and take Ashton Kutcher with you. You know what I mean? Like, just come on. It's not working. She's bringing us down. And so Jesus gets out there. And at this, she turned and she saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize it was Jesus. Why? Because Jesus is dead. And so he asked her, woman, why are you crying? Who are you looking for? And she's like, thinking he was the gardener, she said, sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where he is, and I'll go get him. Like, maybe that's what's going on here. Maybe it's that day, that time of year where this time every year they just kind of switch up bodies and graves. You know what I mean? They're like, we just got to keep things on rotation. I don't know. That's what gardeners do, right? Like that's their MO. How many gardeners we got in the room? Stop digging up bodies. It's weirding everybody out. Okay, stop it. Like that's the most logical conclusion she could come to. Maybe the gardener's just digging up bodies. Like that's what's going on here, And does this sound like a woman who's so gullible as to think that anyone on earth could just walk up to her and convince her that Jesus rose from the dead? Does it even cross your mind that in just how this story is going, that anyone is cooking up this idea, maybe we can convince people Jesus rose from the dead? No. The angels didn't convince her. Jesus, she thought, was a gardener. Nothing was convincing her until Jesus said to her, Mary. And everything clicked. All the pieces started falling in line. Everything came together. She turned towards him and she cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said earlier in John, he said, I am the good shepherd. And the good shepherd lays his life down for his sheep. And he calls them by name. And they recognize his voice. And the good shepherd has risen from the dead. And he says, Mary. And she goes, wow, okay, I cannot believe this. I lost you once. I'm never losing you again. She grabs a hold of him. She can't let go. And he says, do not hold on to me yet, because I've not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them that I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, my God and your God. And she went out and found the disciples, and she said, I have seen the Lord. You see, No one was expecting the resurrection. And when it happened, it caught everybody off guard. But somewhere in the middle of not knowing who Jesus is and calling him my Lord, something changed. It is when she realized that God loves her. God knows who she is. You're not lost at sea somewhere. You see, the resurrection was not a magic trick. It was not a great illusion. We have seen great magic tricks and illusion. I believe someone made the Empire State Building disappear or the Statue of Liberty or something. History does not hinge on great magic tricks. The resurrection was a message. The message was that no matter, as far down as Jesus dove and sank to come find us, that's how high he will fly with us. The message was that now my God can also be your God. That now my Father can also be your Father. So go let everyone that knows and everyone that believes hear the good news that I've risen from the dead and I've made it possible for people to come back to God. Easter is the center of our faith. It is the day on which everything hinges in history and in our faith. It was not good enough just that Jesus came to earth. It was not good enough just that he was a great teacher. It was not good enough that he showed up and said the kingdom of heaven is at hand and that he gave us a Sermon on the Mount. We needed more. It was even not good enough for him just to die on our behalf. We needed the empty tomb. We needed something that could give us hope past the death, past the grave, and so that we could cling to and trust no matter what. The resurrection is not a magic trick, it's a message. It's a warning shot across the bow of sin and death to say you're no longer king down here. Things are not going that direction forever. The resurrection was the first hint that death would actually start moving backwards. That things could actually be made whole again. And the best of all is that it happened. Is that it really happened. And we can look even death in the face and say, you will not destroy me. Because my Lord has made his God my God and his Father my Father. Madeleine L'Engle says this, Easter, that day which follows the harrowing of hell of great and holy Saturday. Easter which turns the terrible Friday into Good Friday. It is almost too brilliant for me to contemplate. It is like looking directly into the sun. I am burned and blinded by life. Easter completes the circle of blessing, and the joy of completion remains despite all the attempts of the powers of darkness to turn it into cursing. With the resurrection, the curses start to move backwards. Jesus is starting to undo the brokenness that we have done. And he started with his own body. There's one more weird thing about this story is that she thought he was a gardener. And I think it's one of those things where you have in movies where her eyes are kind of blurry and every once in a while in these kind of like mystical movies, in the blurriness, she can see through something that she can't see with clear eyes. She can see the truth that's not normally there, present all the time. It's one of those moments where she saw, oh, Jesus is not just this character. He is the gardener. He is the gardener. You know, God loves using gardens as starting points. He loves being the person who he created the world out of nothing. The word is ex nihilo. That's the Latin of it. It means out of nothing. And he created everything out of nothing. And then the moment he created it, he got his hands in the dirt and planted a garden because he loves to take dirt and make it come bursting into life. And Jesus is a gardener. And Polkinghorne, the guy from previously, says this: the resurrection was an act of creation. Except this time it was not ex nihilo, this time it was ex viteri. Not out of nothing, but out of the old. that what Jesus does when he gets his hands on us is he takes the old and he makes it new again. He takes the broken and he makes it whole again. He takes the dead and brings it to life again. He takes the marred and makes it beautiful again. He takes what we have done with his creation and he makes it his creation again. And in Revelation he says, behold, I am making all things new. I'm making everything new. I'm bringing it back to normal. I'm taking the dirt that you have made of this world and I'm making it come bursting into life. And he started on Easter Sunday. He started on Easter Sunday. And if that's what God does with dirt, what can he do with us? What is it that God can do in my life and in your life? What is it that just looks like dirt to us? What is it that just looks like death to us? What is it that just looks like ugliness that God could bring his power, his resurrection power, and make it come bursting into life? I don't know. But I do know one thing he can do is he can make his God your God. And he can make his Father your Father. And all who believe in him will be brought in to the family of God. One of the popes once said a line I quite loved. He said, let's celebrate because we are people of the resurrection. We are people of the resurrection. Not just today, but every single day. Let God come into your life and make those curses start moving backwards.